What's up everybody, welcome back. So in this video I'm going to show you how I set up my weapon inventory and my FireWeapon event especially. So this is just one FireWeapon event I use for all of my weapons. I can use it to make a burst fire shotgun firing projectiles, but I can also use it to make a single fire trace pistol. So this is one event that should tackle all of your weapon needs. So projectiles, trace weapons, burst weapons, shotguns, rechamber, you name it, anything should be in here, and once you have it set up you should be good to go. And I'm also showing you how I set up my inventory with a data table structure and things like that, so it's easy to switch, add weapons and all that kind of stuff. So there's plenty to do, let's just dive into it. So let's start at the beginning. You could add this to any project you want. You could start a new default project or add it to a game project you're already working on for a long time. That shouldn't really matter. There are a few things that could make it easier to test some stuff along the way. So I have a very simple HUD setup. Just a little rechamber hint, because I'm not playing any rechamber animations at this point, so at least I can see why I can't fire my weapon if I'm rechambering. And then the weapon name, clip and ammo stock values, and I have some simple events just to hide or show those variables or to update the values. So nothing fancy, but just could help along the way. And I also have an enemy setup, so just a red mannequin, and we can use him for collision and stuff like that. So if you have an enemy and a HUD, that would make your life a little bit easier, but you don't really need any of it. So let's start, and we're gonna add a few inputs. So let's go to our project settings and to the inputs. So I'm gonna add one for switching weapons. I already have it set up, so we're gonna use that later, so it's already nice to have it in here. Then I'm gonna add one for a fire weapon, and I'm also gonna add a reload weapon. So this is going to be my left mouse button, and to make sure we can reload when our clip is out, we're gonna add a reload as well. So that's on the keyboard, the R, there we go. So we have the input set up, and we also need a trace channel, so let's do that first as well. So let's go back to the project settings, and we're gonna go to our collision, and over here we have trace channels, and we're gonna add a new trace channel, and let's call this bullet trace. And the default setting is going to be block, that's fine. And now if we go to the presets over here, we want to select the pawn, double click it, and you want to make sure that the pawn is set to ignore. Oh, that's not correct. You want to set the bullet trace over here to ignore for the pawn object. Accept this, and then you also want to go to the character mesh, and we want to set the bullet trace to overlap. And let's accept it. So if we look at our enemy, we have the capsule component over here, and that is set for the collision preset pawn. So we don't want to hit the capsule component, that's why we set the pawn to ignore. And if we look at the mesh, then the collision preset is set to character mesh. So we made sure we are overlapping the character mesh so we can hit the actual mesh and not the capsule. So that's why we set up the bullet trace like that. So let's go into the character and let's start setting up a few things for the inventory. So I'm in my character, and the idea of this setup is that it's not only really easy to add any kind of weapon, so a projectile weapon, a trace weapon, shotgun, full auto, burst, whatever you want, but it's also really easy to add weapons to it. So we're going to use a data table and a struct. And to demonstrate that, I'm also going to set up a small inventory, so it's pretty much the same as it should be in a game project, and everything is clear how it's set up. So in our character we need a bunch of variables first, so I've made a little cheat sheet. If you pause the video and add these variables to your character, then we're gonna continue after that. So you can pause the video and add them. I made a little note if it's an array, and I also have variables with a CW prefix, and that's the current weapon. So if we have a weapon equipped, then all the variables with the CW prefix will determine how that weapon acts. So that's why we have an ammo stock max, but also a current weapon ammo stock max. And these are arrays, so we can access them at any time, and we can access the inventory at any time as well. So if we pick up ammo for a weapon, but we don't have that weapon equipped, we can easily check in the array indexes over here if we can actually pick up ammo for that weapon and things like that. So that's why these are arrays, and we can access the entire inventory at any time. So, well, you should be able to copy them in the meantime, so we're just gonna continue. We have the variables in place over here, and first I'm gonna add a new function, and I'm gonna call that init weapon inventory. So this is the function you want to call first at BeginPlay, just to set up the size of the inventory and to make sure we have the correct amount of slots. So this is pretty simple. We're going to drag in our weapon inventory size, and we're going to do -1. And then we're going to add a for loop. So not for each, but for. And the first index is going to be 0. The last index is going to be the result of this. And then we're going to drag in our weapon inventory names array. And we're going to set an array element. And we can hook it up to the body. Make sure the index is connected as well, so these match up. And then we're going to set the item to none. So there's no weapon in there. And we're going to make sure it's size to fit. And that's pretty much all we need to do in here. So we're going to return. And that's our setup inventory. Now we're also going to add an add weapon to inventory function. So let's create another function. Add weapon to inventory. And this is going to have two inputs. So the first one is going to be the inventory index. So that's the index where we want to store the new weapon. And the second one is going to be the weapon row name. So as I mentioned, we're going to use a struct and a data table. And in a data table, you can look up all the variables by the name of the row. So if we name a weapon a certain weapon row name, then we can retrieve all of those variables. So first we want to get our weapon inventory names array in here. And again, we're going to set an array element. And we're going to set the index from the input node to the weapon row name variable. And after that, we're going to get the data table row that belongs to it. So get data table row. And we don't actually have a data table yet, so that might be a bit of a problem. So let's just connect up the weapon row name over here for now. And then we can't really do anything in here yet. Well, we could kind of finish it. So if we drag in our ammo stock max, and we're gonna get a set array element node again. And we need to hook this up to the row found pin. Now we can't plug in any variables yet, but we're going to do that at a later point. But we can copy this 3 more times and set the other arrays as well. So we need the ammo stock max, the ammo, this should be ammo clip max. So that's a mistake on my side. Not min. There we go. And then we have the current weapon ammo stock and the current weapon ammo clip. So this field, I should drag this in again. There we go. So basically, when we add a weapon to our inventory, then all we do is add the weapon name to the weapon row names inventory, and we're making sure that we set all of the ammo variables. So you shouldn't have to size to fit them, but it doesn't really hurt either, so why not? And let's add a return node, and we're going to go back to this function once we have a data table set up to actually plug in some values over here. So for now, compile and save. Yeah, that's fine. I'll see you back in the character, and we're gonna start the FireWeapon event first. So we're going to need a whole bunch of variables in the character for the weapon, but we also need two enumerations. So let's create those first. I'm gonna create a new folder and call this weapons. And I'm gonna create a blueprint enumeration, and the first one is going to be my weapon type. And I'm gonna add 4 enumerators, or however they are called. And the first one is going to be single, the second one is going to be full auto, third one is going to be burst, and the last one is going to be auto burst. So this is the variations in fire types that we have. So we have a single burst and an auto burst. If you hold down the fire button, it will keep burst firing. So I have 2 separate enumerators for that. And then I'm also going to create an AmmoType enum. So again, blueprints enumeration, and that's the AmmoType. And I'm only going to add 2 in here for now, but we can expand it later, so that's why I like to use enumerators or enums. So the first one is going to be trace, and the second one is going to be projectile. So one little side note, if you do use enums, then you want to make sure that you do not go around and mess around with the values later. So you could add stuff to it, that's not really a big problem, but you don't want to rearrange them or remove something in between, because then you have to go into all of your blueprints and redo all of the enum nodes, because they will change and you need to update them. So if you use an enum, make sure only add things to it, but don't make big changes to it. So we have the enums set up. Let's go back into our character, and as I mentioned, we need to create a whole bunch of variables. So again, I have a little cheat sheet. Let me grab it, and we need to add all of these variables to our character. So pause the video and add them, and I'll do the same and get back to you. There's one little side note over here for the fire animation. I'm using vector curves, so this is kind of a unique setup, I think. So if you're using a normal project, just enter your animation montage as a variable here instead of the vector curve, and that's your fire animation. So you can pause the video and add the variables to your character. I'm gonna do the same, and I'll be right back. So we're back in the character with all of the variables in place, and let's start building the FireWeapon input event. So let's get the event first, FireWeapon. And the first thing we're going to do is set our fire button pressed variable. So make sure you set it to true when pressing it and back to false when releasing the button. Then we need a branch in here, and we're going to check if the current weapon has any ammo in the clip. So we need our CW ammo clip array, and we're going to get a copy from our CW weapon index. So drag that in over here. So the weapon index is the current weapon index we are using. So we want to make sure this is greater than 0. So get greater than. And we also want to check if we're not already firing. So let's get an AND in here, and let's get our current weapon is firing, and make sure that we are not already firing. Plug them in. So if this is true, then we should be good to go. And if this is false, we're going to set our fire button pressed back to false. So plug it in over here. The first thing we need to do over here is reset our burst fire count. So drag it in and make sure that we set it back to 0. And then we're going to set our current weapon is firing. And we're going to set it to true over here. Then we're going to enter the actual fire loop. So the first thing we're going to do is add 1 to our burst fire count. So drag in the burst fire count and let's increment it. And plug it in. Then we're going to take 1 bullet from our clip. So I'm going to make a function for that. And that's pretty much for the HUD only, but I'm going to add it anyway. So if you want to do it as well, make sure you add it at this point. So I'm going to take bullet from clip. If you do not have a HUD, you can kind of skip this. So we're going to get our current weapon ammo clip in here, and we're going to get the current weapon index. Then we're going to subtract 1 of it, so -1, decrement int, and then we need to store it in the array. So we're going to get our current weapon ammo clip. And we're going to set the array element, plug it in. We're going to set it for the current weapon index. And we're going to set it to the return value from this. And then I'm going to call my HUD and I'm going to update the ammo clip. So I have a reference to my HUD in here. And I'm simply going to call update ammo clip. And plug in the new ammo value again. So I'm not sure if this is a good idea, to be honest. Yeah, it should work. Okay, this is just a getter, so that's fine. So this update ammo clip in my HUD, it just sets the text for the clip to the current number you put in. So that's all I'm doing over here. And then add a return node. Go back to the event graph and we're going to call the take bullet from clip function, plug it in. And let's see, the next thing we're going to do is play the animation at this point. So if you play a montage, then you just want to get the play montage and select this node. I'm using curve animation, so that's a setup I'm working on in my own project. You probably don't have this unless you follow my recent tutorial. So I'm going to play the curve animation, but you probably just want to play your animation montage. So drag in the current weapon fire montage that we created. And that should be good to go. Now we want to play the fire sound as well. So get a play sound at location. We're going to get our own actor location as the location to play the sound, plug it in, and for the sound we're going to use the current weapon fire sound variable. So at this point we might want to spawn the muzzle flash as well, so get the spawn emitter attached. And we want to attach it to the first person gun mesh, to your component. The emitter template is going to be the muzzle flash current weapon variable. And we're going to use the muzzle socket name variable as well. And make sure that we snap it to the target, keep world scale, that should be fine. So that's the muzzle flash as well. At this point we are going to add a delay and we're going to wait for the fire time of the weapon. So current weapon fire time. And plug it in over here. Then we're going to double check if we still have enough ammo in the clip to continue, because we took out a bullet, so we need to make sure we can actually fire the next shot. So let's get a branch in here, and again we're going to check our current weapon ammo clip for the current weapon index, and we want to make sure it's greater than 0, so we can copy all of this and paste it over here. So if this is false, then we can actually stop firing. So we're gonna set our current weapon is firing back to false, and the is fire button pressed as well. So let's create a bit of room over here. We're gonna need it. So if we do have enough ammo, then we want to check the weapon type for the current weapon. So we want to get our current weapon type, and I don't think I put that in the list. No, I didn't. So let's create a new variable, and that's our current weapon type. And that's the weapon type enumeration that we created earlier. So look for weapon type enum. Oh, we have 2 of them. That's nice. Okay. So let me see, what was I doing? We're gonna get our current weapon type, and we're gonna switch on this. So drag over here and look for switch. So we can determine what we want to do if we have a certain weapon equipped. So if we're single firing, then we don't really want to do anything. We want to stop firing anyway. I'm sorry. So we do need to check if we have a rechamber weapon. So we want to play our rechamber animation at that point maybe. So we're going to drag off the single fire pin, and we're going to check if our current weapon is rechambering. And if this is false, then we can just stop firing. So we're gonna go to the branch over here, or the execution pin, and that's gonna lead to these setters over here. And if it's true, then at this point you want to play your rechamber animation. So as I mentioned, I don't really have a rechamber animation at this point, so I'm simply gonna call my HUD and show a little rechamber hint. So I'm gonna drag in my HUD, and I'm gonna set the rechamber hint and make sure it's visible. And then I'm gonna wait for the rechamber time. So the current weapon rechamber time. And after that, I'm simply gonna hide it again. So again, if you have a rechamber animation at this point, you want to play the montage for it, and you also might want to add a variable for the montage in the list as well. So I'm gonna pause real quick. The batteries of my mouse died, so obviously this happens while recording stuff, so I'm gonna get new batteries quickly. Okay, I'm back and we should be good to go. Where was I? So the rechamber hint, all I'm doing is showing a little hint over here, so I know why I can't fire the weapon at that point. Otherwise, just play your animation over here. And then we're gonna go back to this execution pin and set everything back to false. So that's the rechamber part as well. Then we're gonna go and do the auto fire branch, I think. Yeah, why not? So let's add a new branch over here, connect this up to the auto. We want to make sure that we still have the fire button pressed. So we already made sure that we do have ammo. We did it over here. So all we need to check if the button is still pressed or not. If it's not pressed, we're gonna stop firing. So we're gonna go back to this execution pin. And if this is true, then we can simply loop back to the beginning of this function, and we're gonna plug it in right over here where we set the burst fire count. So let's clean it up a little. There we go. So that's the full auto branch, and now all we need to do is the burst ones. So let's add another branch over here, and we can actually connect both of them to this branch. And first we're going to check if the burst fire count is smaller than the current weapon burst fire count. So this burst fire count is the variable stored on the player, and that's the one we're actually increasing over here every time we fire a shot. And we want to make sure that this is smaller than the value set in the weapon, so the current weapon burst count. So if we have a 3-round burst, then we can set this value to 3, and this will make sure that each burst will have 3 shots. So check the burst fire count over here. If this is true, then we simply want to loop back, so we're gonna continue firing this burst. And if this is false, then we want to wait for our burst delay. So we're gonna add a branch in here, and this is the time in between every burst that we need to wait. So we can specify a fire time and a burst delay. So those are 2 different values. After this, we need to add another branch. And we want to check if our current weapon type, so that's the enumeration. And we want to know if this is auto burst. So let's get an equal enum, and we can select auto burst from the list over here. And we also want to know if we have our fire button still pressed. So let's get an end node, and let's plug in the fire button pressed and hook this up to our branch. So if this is true, then we want to set the burst fire count back to 0, so we can start a new burst. And then we need to loop back to the execution pin that goes back to the beginning of the event. So loop it back over here. And if this is false, then we need to stop firing. So we're gonna plug it in to the setters over here. And then I think we should be good to go for the fire event. We do not have any loose ends, so this should work. So we are going to continue and add a few other functions to actually fire the trace and things like that. So the first new function I'm going to create is the fire bullet trace function. So fire bullet trace. And first I'm going to go back into the fire weapon event, and right at the beginning I'm going to call this function. So let's plug it right over here, so we don't forget. Now let's go into the fire bullet trace function and set it up. So first let's get a branch in here, and we want to check if this is a shotgun or not. So get the current weapon is shotgun. I didn't make it a boolean, but I do have it in here, so there it is. And plug it into the branch. So first do the false pin, because that's the easiest one probably. So first we're gonna get a multi-line trace by channel. So we're actually gonna use a bullet penetration, so we're gonna use a multi-line trace. And the first thing I'm going to do is make sure I set it to the bullet trace channel that we created at the beginning of the video. Then we need to set up the trace. So first I'm going to get my first person gun in here. And I'm going to get my socket. So get socket location. Now in my instance I'm using an aim socket on each weapon to set up my procedural ADS, and I'm going to use that to fire the weapon from as well. Otherwise you could use your muzzle flash socket, for example, so you could replace it with that. But I'm going to use my aim socket, and I'm going to get the location from it. So this is the starting point of the line trace, and then I'm going to also get the rotation of this socket. So get socket rotation, and if we have the rotation we can get the forward vector. So get forward vector from the rotator, and we want to multiply this vector, so it's going to end up a whole lot in front of us, so probably something like 100,000, depending on how big your maps are and things like that. You can play around with this number a little bit. We're gonna drag off the socket location and add those two vectors together. and this is going to be the endpoint of our trace. Plug this into the false pin, and then we get an array of out hits, and we're going to create an event, a function to handle all of the hits. So create a new function, and I'm going to call this bullet trace hit, and give this an input, and that's going to be the hit results, and that's an array of hit results. So let's go back to this function in a little bit and finish this one first. So drag in the bullet trace hit after you did the line trace and plug in the results like this. And that's all we need to do over here. So we're going to get a return node, and we're going to set up the shotgun branch. So that's kind of the same, but we want to add spread to it, and we want to make sure that we fire multiple rounds. So first we're going to need a local variable, and I'm going to call that fired shots. So local fired shots. So that's the amount of pellets that's in a shotgun round, pretty much. So I'm going to get my multi-line trace by channel stuff, and I'm going to copy this over here, connect it up to the true pin. But this time from the forward vector, I'm going to disconnect it, and I'm going to get a random unit vector cone in degrees. So random unit, oh come on, vector cone in degrees. And this is going to apply the spread of the shotgun, so we can plug in our shotgun spread from the current weapon variables. Plug this into the multiplier, and then this is going to be added to the starting location for the end of the trace, so that should still work. Make sure it's bullet trace again if you didn't copy the node. And after that we want to call the bullet trace hit event again, or function, and plug it in like this. Then we're going to add one to our local variable, so drag it in and increment it. And we need to double check if we're not exceeding the shot count of this weapon. So we're gonna get the local fired shots. And if this is equal to our current weapon shotgun shot count, then we need to stop firing. So drag in the current weapon shot count for the shotgun. And if this one is true, we need to go to the return node. And if it's false, we're gonna add another bullet. So we're going to loop back to the beginning. And that's the shotgun branch done as well. Okay, that's fine. So let's continue by setting up the bullet trace hit event or function. Come on. Why do I keep doing that? It's so weird. But whatever. So let's go into the function, and we're going to get a for each loop with break. And first of all, we're going to break the hit result. And we're going to make sure that we actually hit an enemy. So in my case, I'm simply going to cast it to the enemy. You could also check if you have a damage interface on the actor or things like that. So there's multiple ways how you could set it up, parent and child blueprints, for example. But at this point, I'm simply going to use a cast. So I need a local variable in here as well, and that's an array of hit enemies. So I'm going to add a local variable, local hit enemies. And that's an array of zombie enemy AI. So the first thing I want to do is drag in this local array, and I want to add unique and plug in the enemy that we hit. So what this does is if the array already contains this zombie, because we may be hitting both of his legs with one shot if we use bullet penetration, and we probably don't want to apply the full damage for both of those impacts. So we're gonna get the local hit enemies array, add unique, and if the enemy is already in the array, it won't get added again, and it will return a -1 over here. So if it gets added, it will return the index, and otherwise it returns -1. So we can use that to check if we need to do damage to this enemy and things like that. So we're gonna add a branch, and we're gonna check if this is not -1, so not equal to -1. So if this is true, then we want to apply damage to the enemy or things like that. So I'm just gonna call my take damage function on my enemy, and all this does is just delete him, so I know I hit him, and that's all I'm doing at this point. But over here you can call the events on your enemy and apply damage, stuff like that. So let's see, we also want to play impact fx at some point, and let's create an event for that first. Yeah, so let's go to the event graph and let's create the empty event so we can call it. So custom event, and that's going to be play impact fx. And go back to the bullet trace hit function, and over here we're gonna call our play impact fx function. And we probably want to add the inputs as well to make it a little bit easier. So go back to the node, and we're gonna add 3 inputs. The first one is hit enemy, and that's a boolean. So if we hit an enemy or if we hit a wall or something. And then 2 vectors, one for the location and one for the rotation. So now we can go back into the bullet trace hit and we can plug things in. So let me double check. So we're just gonna set this one manually. If we hit an enemy, we set it to true. And if the cast failed over here, we're gonna call the play impact fx function as well, but we're gonna set it to false. Now we can plug in the location and the rotation from the hit results, and do the same for the other node over here. So the normal. You could obviously at this point also get the, let me see, physics material, and from the physics material you can get the surface type, and if you set up physical surfaces and things like that, then you can plug it into your play impact fx function and get the correct fx and handle it a bit more advanced. But at this point I'm just going to use 2 kind of fx's, one for hitting an enemy and one for hitting a wall. And that's all I'm doing over here. So let me see, we want to add a branch over here, and we want to make sure that if the size of our hit enemies array, so that's the local variable, drag it in over here and get the length. If this is greater than the bullet penetration of the weapon, then we want to stop damaging enemies and handling the trace. So we're gonna stop execution, probably, basically. So over here we want to drag in the current weapon bullet penetration variable. So if we set this variable to 1, it means it will penetrate 1 zombie and hit a second one as well, and after that it will stop. If we set it to 0, there won't be any bullet penetration at all. And if we set it to 3, for example, it will go right through 3 zombies and hit the 4th one, and there it will stop. So this is how this variable is set up. If we plug it in, and if this is true, then we're gonna break the loop, so it will stop going through the enemies or the hits. So plug it into the break over here. And then we can add a return node because we are done over here. And we already have the calls for this function in place, so that's fine. We can close all of this down and we do need to set up the play impact FX. So let's do that right away. Let's get a branch in here and let's check if we hit an enemy or not. So I'm gonna store the particle system in the normal impact FX variable that we created at the top over here. And we also have the current weapon impact FX, and those are the variables that we're gonna store in the data tables later. So right now I'm just gonna copy and paste it twice. And if this is true, then we're gonna play the impact FX enemy. So that's this one. And if it's false, we're gonna play our normal impact FX. And then we're gonna spawn an emitter at location. Plug in both of the branches, and we're gonna play our impact FX. And we can simply get the location and the rotation from the event over here. It will convert the rotator for you, so that should work fine. And that's all we need to do for the impact FX event. So let's continue and actually make the structure and the data table where we're going to store the variables for the weapon. So I'm back in my project content folder in the weapons folder I created, and we're going to add a weapon info structure. So if you right click and go to blueprints structure, and you can name it, and then if you open it up, you want to add all of these variables into the structure. So just pause the video and add all of the variables. Again, one little side note, for the fire animation you want to use your animation montage. For a normal project I'm using my vector curve setup. So for normal projects use your animation montage for the fire animation. And make sure that you set up the info structure in the same way like I did. And once you have done that, so let me get rid of this empty one. Then we're gonna right click and go to miscellaneous, and we're gonna add a data table. And then you need to pick a structure, so it will show a duplicate ones. It doesn't really matter which one you pick. So pick the weapon info structure that you just created. And this is going to be my weapon info table. And we can simply add the weapons that we want to use in this data table, and the rest will be handled for us. So we're going to add one row, and I'm going to call this the pistol. So this is the row name I need to use in my inventory to make sure I can use this weapon. So this is the weapon row name, hence row name. So over here I can set a display name if that doesn't match the row name, so I can make sure on the HUD it shows correctly. And we can fill out all of the variables for the weapon over here. So I'm gonna select my pistol mesh and just fill in a bunch of variables. So 80 and 8 should be fine. Fire time 0.1, single fire, no penetration. So my muzzle socket should be muzzle flash, I think. Yeah, that should be good. And for the muzzle flash, I think I do have some effects over here. So let's just plug it in, why not? Pistol muzzle flash. And the fire sound. There we go. So this is not a rechambering weapon, so we don't need to fill out any of this stuff. It's not a burst, it's not a shotgun. And you do need to add your fire animation over here. So I'm gonna add my curves, but you can add your normal montage. So that should work. And let's keep it at one weapon for now, so we can continue working on the setup first. So let's go back into our character blueprint, and we want to go back into the add weapon to inventory function first. And we had the get data table row node in here, so let's get it back in here. And plug in the row name, we want to use the weapon info data table that we just created, and we're going to break the hit result. And over here we can get the variables for the arrays. So for the ammo stock, you want to plug it into both of the item ones. So the current weapon ammo stock and the maximum ammo stock. And for the clip, do the same. And for the inventory index, we can actually get it from the input. So make sure that you do connect it up to each one of these nodes. And that should be good. And now we're going to create a new function that will set all of the other variables for us. So let me get my little cheat sheet on the side. And let's create the function. So let's call it setup weapon. And give it one input, and that's the weapon row name. And that's a name variable. So the first thing we need to do is get our data table row name, plug in the weapon row name and select the correct data table. So break the struct again, and then we're going to store all of this stuff in the variables that we created. So for my HUD, I'm going to drag it in and I'm going to update the weapon name on my HUD. So update weapon name. If you don't have a HUD, just skip it. Plug in the display name so it displays the correct name. And then I'm going to drag in my first person weapon and I'm going to set the skeletal mesh. And that's set to the weapon mesh from the info structure. And then we want to set the correct ammo values on the HUD if you use a HUD. So I'm going to drag it in. So this is the function that we're going to call if we select a new weapon. So at that point we also want to update the HUD. So that's why I'm doing this in here. So I'm simply going to call my update ammo functions. Update ammo stock and update ammo clip. And I want to set them to the current values. So that's my current weapon ammo stock. Get a copy from the current weapon index. And do the same thing for the clip. But make sure that we plug in the current weapon ammo clip. So that should be good to go. And then we can continue just by setting all of the variables in the structure. So we have matching variables over here, and we're simply going to drag them in and make sure that we connect everything up. Muzzle flash, where it's at, over here. Fire sound. Burst count, there we go. And then we have the burst delay, so that should be a float. So I messed that up. So I need to go back into my structure to change it. So let's go to the weapons folder over here, the weapon info structure, and make sure that my burst delay is set to a float. And now that should be good. So burst delay, then we need the is shotgun, the shotgun shot count, and the spread. And make sure that we plug everything in. So now all of the variables for this weapon are stored on my character, and I don't have to access the data table anytime. And this is just for the weapon that we're actually holding in our hands. So every time we switch weapon, we're going to call this function. And plug in the execution pin as well. So this is a bit tedious, but we'll get through it. Almost there. There we go. I think that was it. Yes, we should be good. So at this point, I think we might be able to test a few things. So let's go into our event graph and let's look for the BeginPlay. Where do we have it? Over here. So the first thing we want to do in BeginPlay is drag in our init weapon inventory. And you want to make sure that you have the inventory size variable over here set to the size you want your inventory to be. So I'm gonna set it to 2 at this point. You can store these variables in a data table or a structure as well and change them for different character types or things like that. But for now, I'm just gonna hard code it. So my weapon inventory size is set to 2 or 3. What did I put in there? I don't even know. 2. Okay, then I'm gonna add a weapon to my inventory. So drag the add weapon to inventory, and I only have one weapon to choose from, so that's my pistol, and I'm gonna put it in my slot 0. That's fine. And then I'm also gonna set up the weapon, so drag in the setup weapon function, and again for the pistol. So right now, if I start the game, I think I should start it with the pistol. So fingers crossed, because usually I screw up something along the way, but we're gonna test it and see what happens. Well, there we go. That actually kinda works. Okay. So it's a bit weird. I'm already switching weapons probably. So I'm using the project I already have set up from my tutorial, so I might want to get rid of a few things. Let me see. If I go over here, I am simply gonna select the gun and clear the mesh. So you can see it's actually setting the mesh, and that works. And if I fire, then it should play the fire animation and do the bullet trace and things like that. So the ADS is not working anymore, that's fine. And if I press fire, then everything crashes. So awesome. I'm gonna double check and see what's happening. I'll be back in a little bit. Okay, it actually wasn't too bad. So I didn't hook up the fire animation, and because I'm using the curve animation setup, if I try to play an empty curve, Unreal doesn't like it and it crashes. So if you're using your montage, then you shouldn't have any issues. If you didn't hook it up, if you did hook it up, you shouldn't have any issues anyhow. But make sure that you also set the fire animation in the setup weapon function, and then everything should pretty much work. So if I play the project, then we have the pistol in hands, and I can ADS because I already added that in the previous part of the tutorial, but that doesn't really matter. So I can fire the weapon, sound plays, FX plays, and let's make sure that the bullet trace is also working. So let's draw the debug type for duration for both the shotgun and the normal branch. And let's see. So we're actually shooting our weapon at this point. And as you can see in the HUD, it also takes away my bullets. And right now I don't have any bullets left and I can't fire my weapon anymore. So that's also working. So this isn't too bad actually. I think I managed to do it without big screw ups this time. But we're not done, so who knows what happens. So let's create the AmmoType enum and set up shooting projectiles as well. So first let's create a projectile to see if things are actually working. So a projectile bullet. And this is going to be pretty basic, so I'm just gonna add a scene component as my root. And then get a capsule component. and this is going to be pretty small, so let me see. Something about 2 or something like that. Yeah, that should do fine, why not? And I'm also gonna add a particle system. Excuse me. So a particle system, and let's select tracer. So the pistol tracer, so we can see we're actually firing. And we need a projectile movement component in here as well, and set the speed, so something like 3500. And make sure that the gravity scale is set to 0. It doesn't really matter, but I'm gonna do it. So we have our super basic projectile setup, and then I'm gonna go back into my weapon info structure and add the weapon, the AmmoType enum and a projectile class. So add 2 variables to the structure. The AmmoType is the first one, and that's our AmmoType enum that we created a little while ago. And the second one is going to be the projectile class. So if I want to fire a different kind of projectile from this weapon, I can simply set it up in the data table. So this is going to be a class, an actor and then a class reference. And that should be good to go. So to test it, we can go into the data table and we can set the AmmoType enum to projectile and make sure that we set up our projectile bullet. There we go. But we need to set it up in the character as well, so let's do that. Let's open up the first person character, and we want to create the events for this. So let me see. Let me double check my list. So we need to obviously set the variables as well in the setup weapon function. So do that first. Go back to your setup weapon function, and we're gonna drag in the current weapon AmmoType, but we need to create that, I think. Yep, I didn't put it in the list, so let's create a new variable, and that's our current weapon AmmoType. That's the AmmoType enumeration. And then we also need the projectile class. So projectile class. And that's also for the current weapon. And that's an actor class reference. And then we can connect them up to the structure output. And that should be good to go. So now we want to create the fire projectile event or function. So let's create a new function, fire projectile. And again, we want to add a branch in here to see if we are firing a shotgun or not. So let's do that first. So we can use projectile based or trace based shotguns. It doesn't really matter, whatever you want. So we're gonna drag in the CW is shotgun. So let's do the false pin first. Let's spawn an actor from class. And we can simply plug in the projectile class over here. And then we need to aim it. So let's get our gun component in here, and we're gonna get the socket transform again. Location. So again, I'm using my aim socket, but you can use your muzzle flash as well. Actually, for the location, I'm using my muzzle flash. And then I'm gonna use the aim socket for the rotation. So I'm gonna drag off here and make transform. And get my aim socket rotation. And from this, get the forward vector. And plug it in over here. So that's my spawn transform. So if you're not using an aim socket, then you could just use the muzzle flash transform, and that should work as well. Not muzzle flash. There we go. So we don't really need to do anything else over here. So we can add a return node. You can handle the hits for the projectile in the projectile blueprint itself. Excuse me. So we don't really need to do anything for the hits in here. So we're going to continue with the shotgun branch, and we're going to spawn a projectile again. And again, we're going to copy all of this stuff, but this time we're going to add the spread to it. So we can connect this up, but we need to disconnect it from the forward vector. And over here, we're going to add the random unit vector again. So random unit vector cone in degrees. Plug this into the rotation and get the current weapon shotgun spread for the cone degree in half angles. And then we need to get a local variable again to count the shots. So local shot count. Damn. And that's an integer. So we're gonna increment the integer over here. And then we want to make sure that it's equal to our shotgun shot count. And if it is, we're gonna break the loop. So equal. And if this is true, then we are done. And if this is false, we want to fire another projectile. And that should be good to go. So now all we need to do is go back into our event graph, and for the fire event over here, we are going to make a little bit of room just right before the fire bullet trace node. And then we're going to drag in our AmmoType enumeration, and we're going to switch. And then if we are a trace weapon, we're simply going to fire the bullet trace, and otherwise we're going to fire the projectile. And that should work. So if we go in game, we should fire projectiles. I think it should work. We have the projectile set up, we have the data table set up, so we should be good to go. So as you can see, I hope you can see it. So I emptied my clip, so I need to restart. Need to work on the loading function. So you can see the projectile flying off. So that's actually working as well. So right now, for example, if I go into my weapon info table, I could make this pistol a shotgun to show the projectile shotgun is working as well. So if I select the is shotgun boolean over here, and then I can specify the shot count. So say I want 8 pellets in one shot, and I'm going to give it a very big spread of 10 degrees. So now you could see that should work. And there we have it. We have a projectile based shotgun, and we can easily specify it in the data table. So again, if I open this up and I would set it back to trace, and we can remove the class for the projectile. And if we leave it to shotgun, then you can see the traces as well. So we have a shotgun setup. And in the same way, we can use it to make a burst fire shotgun, for example, and fire 3 burst. So if we set this to burst, and then we're gonna set the burst delay to 1 second and the burst count to 3. So that should make it that we fire 3 rounds and then have to wait for 1 second, and then we can continue firing. So there we have it. And if we only have 2 bullets left in the clip, it's only gonna fire those 2 bullets, so that's working as well. So this is the base of the function. Let's add a little bit of reloading and weapon switching so we can quickly double check a bit of other stuff, and then for this video we are done. So let's get into the last part. So the video is getting pretty long, so I don't want to spend too much time on the weapon switching and reloading, because that's kinda out of the scope of this video, but I'm just gonna go over a few things quickly, because the inventory part is kind of part of the setup. So let's say you have multiple weapons set up in this inventory, then all you need to do to switch weapons is cycle through the inventory array. So you're gonna get your weapon index and you wanna check the length of the array, and if you exceed the index array, then you want to set it back to 0, otherwise increment the index, and then you can call the setup weapon function with the current weapon index, and once you call this function, then the weapon will be active. So at this point you want to play your lower animation. If the weapon is off screen, you want to set up the new weapon and then play the raise animation. And if I'm going into my data table, I have added 2 other weapons, so I don't have any other animations in here, but I just replaced the meshes and set some other variables, so we kinda have 3 weapons in here. So what I'm gonna do is go back to the event BeginPlay, and then I can simply duplicate the add weapon to inventory node over here, and make sure that I set the correct indexes and row names. So if I want to add the shotgun in my 2nd slot and the rifle in my 3rd slot, this is how I would set it up. And if I call the setup weapon function last, this is the weapon I will start the game with. So compile save, and this should work. So if I switch weapon, there's no animations, but you can see we have the pistol, shotgun working. So for some reason the rifle is not working, and I know why. Because I set my inventory size to be 2, so I need to increase it to make sure I can actually use a 3rd slot over here. And now I should have 3 weapons. Where the frick is my viewport? There we have it. So we have a pistol, we have a shotgun, and we have a rifle. So that's working with the weapon switching. For the reload I can be pretty quick, because that's really out of the scope of this weapon. But say if you want to reload, you want to check your current weapon ammo stock for the weapon index to see if you actually have ammo to reload with. Then you can check if you actually fired a bullet or not. So if the current clip size is smaller than the maximum clip size, then you want to calculate how many bullets you actually need to put in the clip to make it a full clip again. So that's the reload difference variable, and that's a new variable you need to create. Once you have that value, you can check if you have enough ammo to make a full reload. So if the ammo stock is greater than or equal to the reload difference value over here. And if you can make a full reload, then you can simply set the clip to max and then subtract the reload difference from your stock. And if you cannot make a full reload, then you put whatever is left in your stock into the clip and you set your stock back to 0. And after that, update your HUD and you should be good to go. Play an animation somewhere over here and it looks a bit better as well. But if you set it up like this, then you could reload. So like I said, no animations, but it's working. So at least for testing purposes, you can continue. So that's reloading setup as well. Now let me double check if the bullet penetration is working. So for the pistol, we should not have any bullet penetration and I should only hit 1 zombie. So that works. I'm actually hitting more of them, but only 1 is being registered and responds. And for the rifle, I think I set it to 2 or 3. So if I fire over here, and you see 2 of them disappear. And if I fire again, 2 of them disappear and 1 left. So the bullet penetration setup is working as well. And what else do I want to mention? The aim is off, kinda. So because we're just shooting from the muzzle socket, you can see you're not actually hitting your crosshair, and depending on if you're shooting close or further away, it's actually getting worse or better. So I do have a video on my channel to get rid of that, depending on how you set up your character. So I have a procedural ADS setup over here, and I'm using that to correct the aim for hipfire. So if you follow this tutorial, which I will link in the top right of the screen, then you will actually shoot at the dead center of your crosshair also when hipfiring. So I'll make sure I'll link this at the top right of the screen for you guys as well. And then I think we have pretty much all of this covered. So one thing you could do is make an input to switch your weapon type, and that way you can switch from auto to burst fire and things like that dynamically in game. So that's something I don't have time to show in this video, but just a little side note. And then I think we should be good to go. So we have the ultimate fire event set up. Thanks for watching, everybody. Talk to you later. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like, and you could also join the GameDev Raw Discord, and in here you have access to my project files, and you can talk with like-minded people about cool game dev stuff. So you're welcome to join. Thanks for watching, everybody. Talk to you later.